Hello and welcome to Brax will let you know, one voice at a time. And today I have a very special guest. Care to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Joshua. I'm a Chicago native, content creator, actor, producer, editor, visual editor, I should say, and just all around life learner and life curious artist.
Awesome. Thank you. So today, Josh and I are going to be talking a little bit, or mostly Josh. I'm just going to be asking some questions regarding representation of the LGBT plus queer community in media. As usual, I always start off with a quote. And today's quote is, "There is room in 2021 and beyond for LGBT projects that straight people won't understand." So the first question for you is, what does representation in media mean to you?
Well, I love that quote, first of all. It's really good. Representation for me, Joseph Beam has this great quote, and he goes, visibility is survival. So for me, representation is that idea of survival, right? So it's pushing past the stereotypes, pushing past the no's that we hear all the time, pushing past those projects that we create, which don't get any traction yet, but as long as they're out there and as long as you've created them, will eventually get traction. So that, in a sense, is what that representation means. It's a way of survival for people of the queer community. Really, it's our essence, it's our soul, it's our identity made manifest in the physical form, so that people can know that we are here. We've been here. We didn't just kind of, pop out of the wazoo in 2010 and now we're just kind of riding it on. This has been a constant struggle. And I think that representation is also a little bit of like a legacy, It's in a way a history book. Being able to go back and see, oh wow, this person created this. I'm not the only person who has these ideas of putting people that look like me, putting people that identify similarly to me on screen or on a stage or writing a book about it. So yeah, it's kind of what that representation, the long answer of what that representation means to me.
Awesome. Thank you. So I have two quotes regarding statistics that people like to throw out normally. So, quote, a 2017 Gallup poll concluded that 4.5% of adult Americans identify as LGBT, presuming that they probably are out.
Right.
And another quote is, a total of 10.2% of regular characters in the 2019 to 2020 broadcast television season are reported to be LGBT, end quote. Do you think that because the population of queer LGBT population is so small, the representation should match that?
Crazy thing about being a part of the community is if you come out, you begin to notice different kind of societal things that happen. And I think we are seeing that a lot in documentaries that are being outsourced or projects that are being created, is people are beginning to kind of pick at those ideas of, oh, I'm not out yet, but I'm still a member of the LGBT community, I don't think that should be, oh, there's only 20%, so you only get 20%, you should only be in 20% of these television series. And I say that just because I think it's important to allow people, especially coming from, being Black, which we fought so long to be on television and not just be like a stereotype, right? Not to be dressed up in blackface and with big lips and playing like this big stereotypical character. And we fought for an image and we fought for characters. And I think being a part of a queer community, we are still fighting for those characters, and we're still fighting for that representation in media specifically, mostly because all we really are seeing are people who aren't of color in media, right? So we're not seeing a vast majority of people in color. So there's, little boys and little girls and little non-binary people who are watching television shows, and they're not seeing those representations of themselves on screen. But when they do, it gives them the life that they need to be given, right? It pushes them to continue to live. It pushes them to continue to wait until they get on their own, wait until they're sustainable by themselves, wait until they're independent so that they can live their full lives. And I think that representation is really important because it allows us to know that we can, right? And then even going back to that idea of like legacy and history, it connects you to that as well. Because looking at Hidden Figures, which was a great movie about Katherine Johnson, I believe her name was, I had no idea that Black people, besides, Mae Jemison, that Black people worked at NASA, were integral parts to helping astronauts travel to the moon and back, do more than that, really, trips to Mars, hoisting satellites into space, things like that. And it fills me with such pride to know that someone that looks like me or someone that was like me, specifically the Black part, was a part of something that this country is proud of. I think we talk a lot of the times about, is this how we want to be portrayed? And I think allowing, not only on screen, but also behind the screen, allowing people of the community to be in the writers' rooms, to be producers on projects, to be directors and cinematographers and directors of photography, helps to perpetuate more stories, because then it's like, oh great, me as a queer person, I'm a producer of this film that's talking about queer people. So I know I'm going to stay away from X, Y, Z. I know I'm not going to play into the stereotypes of, queer people doing all these crazy things and having all this wild sex and things like that. But I'm going to tell a true, genuine story. And I think we begin to see that a little bit in movies like Moonlight, a little bit, like Blackbird, which is like a totally different, but like totally not, because it still falls into some of the tropes of queer stories, disapproving parents, parents blaming things that have happened in the family because of you, because you're queer. But I think I say it shows a little bit different story because the main character isn't this bigger than life personality, right? It's about it's more intimate, I think, with the character. Sorry, I've gotten a little away from the question, but I think that representation matters, right? Because not everyone is going to be Karamu Brown from Queer Eye, not everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, girl. So it's important to see not only more representation, more than just 10%, but more diverse forms of that representation. Because I'm not going to be the same as you, you're not going to be the same as John's not going to be the same as Zara's not going to be the same as Samantha. So all of us who have stories have to come together somehow and be able to lift each other's voices, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about having a voice, having a seat at the table. And I think having those intersecting identities of being queer and Black makes it really difficult, because then people will be like, well, there are queer people in Will and Grace, and there are queer people in trying to think of another like white gay or white queer movie that recently come out, like, you know, All Boys Don't Cry or something like that. And it's like, yeah, that's a queer representation, but that's specifically a white representation of a queer identity. You know, it's not until you really do some research and you find things like Noah's Ark, or you find things like punks, or you find things like
For the Boys.
For the Boys, love For the Boys,
Yeah.
For the Boys, that you really start to think to yourself, and you're like, oh, this could be me. I see successful queer people doing things. You know, it's not always about relationships. Sometimes it's just cool to see a queer person in charge.
Or coming out.
You know, or embracing themselves as a queer person, because I think a lot of the times we as queer people, especially queer people of color, we're fighting within ourselves because there are two parts of us, right? Whether you're Black, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Asian, whether you're Pacific Islander, you know, whether you're Indian, there are all these different morals and values that your community has that are instilled within you. But once you throw in queerness to the mix, then it's almost like these values can't stand on the same foundation as those. Mm-hmm. But I think seeing representations like these that we're seeing now are showing you that yes, they can. I can still be hardworking. I can still be a member of the community. I can still be someone who deserves, needs, and wants love, platonically, romantically, sexually, spiritually, all of that. Like, it's all valid. And I think that representation, the fact that it's only 10% is one problem, but it also shows us that there are more stories out there that need to be told. Mm-hmm. And as a storyteller myself, you know, I do my best to look within myself and create art that I know that I need, because you never know who else needs that exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And I think For the Boys is a great example of that, because this is a project that these queer men of color came together and were like, I kind of am longing for something that shows a non-binary person that's not, you know, being ridiculed or being called a freak of nature or being demeaned because they have a different way of expressing than everyone else. That's totally normal because it's been around for forever. You know, we see that in shows like David Makes Man, where there's a character in the series where is a kind of like non-gender conforming because their pronouns change all the time. You know, they call this person Miss Elijah, right? Elijah, which is a stereotypical male name, and then Miss, which is a female pronoun, you know? So it's like, these things have been around, and even in some of my own experiences with queer people in my life, they have been extremely present, but the thing is, we don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I actually think one of the new shows called The Upshaws has this really cool scene where the mom is with her son and he's like checking out the waiter, and then he's like, I needed to tell you something. And she was like, other than the fact that you're looking this waiter up and down, you know? And she's like, I know that you're gay, and like, I'm totally fine with that. You know, it's like those things that we missed in the 2000s, and we missed in the 90s, and we missed in the 80s because, you know, we were fighting for our lives. Those things need to be shown, and correct representations of those things. Like the Stonewall movie, which was absolutely terrible because it was centered around a white man, which if you look up the history of Stonewall, it's not even, you know, white people were there, of course, but it's like, that's not the accurate history of Stonewall, you know? So give the people who deserve the representation and who deserve the credit for doing the things that they did, Marsha P. Johnson, give them what they deserve.
Mm-hmm. So there are thoughts on, quote, gay people on every channel, everywhere they turn.
Yeah.
Or quote, I don't want my child to be exposed to that so young. The concept of exposure. And I kind of wrote that heteronormativity is so pushed into all medias, whether commercials, TV, magazines, etc.
Right.
And yet LGBTQ people still exist. It's sort of like debunking the argument that if my child looks at gay material or LGBT material, that they're going to be gay. But straight material or heteronormative material has been here forever, and there's still people who exist outside of that.
Right. I have a lot of thoughts on that. Because I think that plays into the idea of this idea that queer people choose to be queer, right? That and I want to preface this conversation by saying that this is just my opinion. There are varying opinions. There are queer people who live in the community who do think that they choose to be gay, and I want to give respect to them and not just use a blanket statement and say this is what we all believe, but this is very much what Joshua believes. That stems from this idea of we as queer people choose to be queer, and it's like you can just stop being queer, you can do this, you can do that. It's like, why would I, which is the argument that we always say, why would I choose to be ridiculed? Why would I choose to be hated? Why would I choose to live a life contrary than what society wants me? This is how I was born, this is how I was crafted, this is how I was created as a human being from literally the moment of my conception until I was born. Like this is who I am. And I think that it's especially thinking about where those quotes come from, which are usually heteronormative, cisgendered parents, right? So all they've known all their life is, I go down this road and I keep going down this road and I'm not gonna stray and go off any other roads, because if I do, then I might get lost and I might not know where I am. So if you are trained over and over and over again to think this way, of course, when you start to see more representation of things that are outside of your normal, you're going to fear that it's going to have an influence on children. But the craziest thing is, I think the last people we need to worry about are the children, just because I think children have this wonderful superpower of making things that are complex in society standards, making them totally normal and extremely easy to grasp as ideas. And that's literally just by the fact that there are children who are growing up with non-gender binary parents. There are children that are growing up with two moms. There are children who are growing up with dads. There are two dads. There are children who are growing up with, trans parents, which is awesome. And the fact that you can just sit your child down and say, we are two people who are in love, regardless of what we look like on the outside. We love each other for that, no matter what. I think that, in and of itself, is the only explanation that children need, because they're able to understand it. And it's not even like, for them, it's not even like this huge thing. They're just like, oh, okay. And it's like on to the next thing. Because their minds are so expressive at that age. It's just another form of expression, an expression of the one thing that we all are kind of going toward, are longing for, which is love, Yeah.
And I think you brought up a really dope point of at birth, and I think we miss this idea of conditioning.
Yeah.
And how when we're born, there's no true freedom to be and live and exist.
Yes.
In your purity and in your authenticity, because there's so many outside forces telling you need to be this, you need to be that. And I mean, I don't know. It's just like
it can be suffocating, and I think that pressure from society. You are a man. You have to dress like this. You cannot wear things like this. Like I remember back in the 90s, the biggest thing was men don't wear pink. So, you know, anything that was pink was like literally, you would be ridiculed for days, for weeks. Even after you like, took it off, people would be like, you remember that time you were wearing pink? And it wasn't until I met a man that his favorite color was pink. And he was a heterosexual man, at least to my knowledge, you know, and I'm like 11, 12 years old. And that just really, it rocked the boat in my mind, because I was like, so it really doesn't matter what people wear, you know? It's like, if you like the color pink, you like the color pink. Like there's no like,
it's literally a color.
yeah, it's like, it's just a color. Like I can't
It's
even
literally
like
a shade.
I can't even conceptualize like putting like standards and rules to a color, because it makes no sense. But yeah, it's like, and I think for children seeing representations of queer people, I think that's great for them, because then within that they can just say anyone can love anyone, and that's great. And I think that's honestly the core of how we get rid of some of the isms that we have in the world. Because, you know, what happens is people are conditioned to be homophobic, people are conditioned to be racist, people are conditioned to be xenophobic. And you might not think that it's this whole, like, you will hate black people, you will hate gay people, you will hate this. But it's slowly over time, and it's little things that build up, you know? You only watch the same television your parents watch. You only are listening to this type of music. You only are reading these type of books. So then you begin to shape this skewed view of what the world really looks like. So then when you see something that's out of the normal of your bubble, then you're apprehensive and you're scared. And then when you're scared, you do stupid things like get a gang of your bros and get tiki torches and like walk in, you know, a white state, and you're like, down with black people, white power, you know, you do stupid things like that because you are afraid of your world being shattered because it's not exactly what you thought, what you expected it to be.
Okay, so I have the question, and you mentioned it a little bit. So I said, so yes, there are a little bit of representation currently, but how can it be better? But the other question is, how can it be more accurate?
Yeah, I did touch on that a little bit, but I think it can go even further, right? Because now what we're seeing is people giving queer people, people of color, people living with disabilities, which we really don't talk a lot about. You know, ableism is a huge problem that we don't talk about. But what we're seeing now is people giving them the space that they need to tell those stories. And I think not only that's how we get more stories, but I think that's how we get better stories. Getting people, like I said, behind the camera, getting people in front of the camera who live those truths. Stop hiring straight actors to play gay roles. And giving the voice to the people who need their voice to be heard. I think Pose is a great example of that right now, just because, you know, we have Janet Mock writing and directing, and then you have people like MJ Rodriguez and Dominique Jackson who have been not only in the ballroom community and the ballroom culture, but who are strong advocates, and Angelica Ross, can't forget Angelica Ross, strong advocates for trans rights. And they're not, one thing I love that they don't do is they don't just talk the talk, right? They're not just like, I'm on television, like trans people aren't really going through anything terrible. No, they let us know, yes, I'm on television, but me being on television is also dangerous for other trans people in these small parts of the world. Because if someone sees this and gets mad, they don't have access to me, but they have access to someone who's down the street. So visibility in the media is a good thing, but it's also a scary thing, right? Because being a visibly out queer person of color on television is like great and all, because you know you can go to your penthouse and you can go and be safe in your house. But little old me, who just lives in the city of Chicago, and you know my neighbors are Trumpers, or my other neighbors over here are Bible thumpers, and my neighbors across the street are people who don't like people of color or queer people, that could become a danger to me. And that's not to say that we don't need representation, because we totally do, but we need it because we have to continue to push what people think normal is. Because right now normal is white cisgender people, point blank period. And I think something that this pandemic has definitely helped us do is see where all of the nooks and crannies that we've missed, right? Where are we dropping the ball? Where are we not supporting people where they need to be supported? And how can we support them? And I'm a huge advocate for giving people the mic and sharing stories, because I truly think stories have the ability to not change the minds of people, but change the hearts of people. Because when you see something, or you hear something, or you experience that on a visual, audible plane and level, then for some reason it becomes real in our minds. So until we can see it, we can't really believe it, you know. And that's kind of crazy, because it's like you can't living life based off of only what you see is honestly why we have all the problems we have now, because people have seen land and then they've been like, well, that's my land now. Oh, well, I need work. Oh, these people are over here. Let me just take them from their country and use them to work. Oh, great. Now I have an empire. I can see my empire in front of me. And I think for the longest time, we've been allowing cisgendered white people to see their visions at the cost of everyone else seeing their vision. Because now I see my vision, but if these people see a vision, if these queer people see a vision, if these black people, if these Asian people, if these people who aren't, Palestinian people, if they see a vision, then that's going to trample on the vision I have. So now, it's the same thing Hitler did, Now I have to let them know, like, oh, you can do this, but you can only do this much. Or you can have, fortune and fame, but it has to look just like this. And that's where, social media comes into it all a little bit too, because that's where this idea of like the perfect life comes from. It's like, oh, look at me, I'm wearing all these really nice clothes, I'm living in this really lavish place. It's like, we don't really need that as people. Not because we shouldn't aspire to live in lavish and, dress nicely and love ourselves to our complete fullest, but if everyone did that, then we would stop forgetting what's really important, which is human connection, which is loving each other and respecting each other. And I think what happens is when we start going for kind of like those big lavish things, we sometimes forget those things, right? Because they're those soft skills that people don't really talk about a lot, and they just kind of go by the wayside. And what happens is we end up letting things slide. Like, you're a trans producer on Pose, and I know you're not getting paid as much as me, but I'm chasing that big dream, so I'm not gonna say anything, because if I say anything, I'm not gonna get to my dream. Versus me saying something, speaking up for you, and then allowing you to speak for yourself. Because not everyone needs you to speak for them, which is also something we gotta learn, I think it's all about balance, When you can, do it, but don't speak for that person. Don't put words in their mouth. Allow them say something, and then allow them the space to continue and let that grow with their words, not yours. But yeah, I think that's how we begin to create more things. And also support. We have to support each other financially, morally, spiritually, because what happens is, for example, I'm writing a play currently, and I haven't touched it in like the longest time, but every time people are like, oh my gosh, I can't wait until you finish it. Like, how much do you have to write? when is the next read? When are we gonna like put this on this feed? Have you started looking at funding and things like that? Like that pushes me to want to finish it. It pushes me to want to make more. It pushes me to want to be more creative. And I think that support, even it's not even financial, like just sharing something, just pushing people to do better, because there is someone out there who just has, who's sitting on millions and billions of dollars, and they're looking for the project to put those millions and billions in. So supporting me and sharing something that I post, supporting me and spreading the word about something that I'm doing is, beneficial not only to me, but also to the things that I'm creating, because I'm creating this most of the time, like I said, for myself, because I feel like I need to get something out, or I need to therapize myself in a way by writing and creating. But usually when you make those things for yourself, they end up being for other people as well.
So I have this question of, actually it's more of a statement, saying that we are our own representation. Like as I look around on like Instagram and stuff like that, it's like we are able to capture our essence and our in the life that we live like ourselves, which is I think is dope about social media and even YouTube, and like allowing our stories to be shared at the access and the ability of our own like we're not relying on like a newspaper to give us a story when we can make our story ourselves, given like the proper resources and tools and stuff like that. But do you have anything to add of like we being our own representation?
Yeah, I think us being our own representation, but also knowing that we don't have to speak for all people in the community. Because sometimes as a Black person being in mostly white spaces most of the time, people will say things like, well, we really don't have a high retention rate for people of color. And then they look at you, you're like, am I supposed to speak for all people of color? Or can we put actual research into this? Like, why aren't people of color subscribing? Why isn't this? Why isn't that? But I totally agree with that. We being visible are that representation that we need to see. And I think it's really powerful when we begin to find those other people who want to be represented, and we all stick together. Which is the reason why, the fist is the symbol for, the Black Power movement. It's the symbol for the Civil Rights movement. It's because when you put your fists together, separately, this isn't that strong, but like when we come together, that's really when we can, make a difference. We can make impact, we can change things. And I think remembering that while being that representation is really important, because a lot of the times when you're being that representation, it's draining. And it's good to know that you have other people there supporting you. So I think it goes back to that idea of support. We have to support each other. We have to support ourselves, definitely, because if you're not all right, you can't give from an empty cup. So we have to make sure that we're supported. And we have to make sure that we are learning the things that we don't know, because we can't come somewhere speaking one way and they don't speak that way. It's like going to a foreign country and like thinking everyone speaks English, but they don't. So you have to learn what those people speak in that culture so that you can know how to operate in it, really. And there's a lot of people who are like, I don't think we need to do that. And that's fine. Find those people that do, and then have them do it, and then you can come in and do what you need to do, So it's like helping each other be great. If you know, oh, Josh is the person who loves to learn how the system works. Great. Learn how the system works. I'm gonna go protest. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. As I'm learning how the system works, I can say, okay, so this is what we need to do. So it's it's this idea of dividing and conquering, but then coming together and being like, this was the plan all along.
I think that's what we miss, because I think there's so much divide and conquering within each individual thing, that I think the root of a lot of this chaos is white supremacy and colonization and colonized thought. And I think that's what we tend to forget, and it's always a me versus them attitude. When there wouldn't be a me versus, we're just missing the root. So hopefully, and I think with this representation and this ability to storytell, we can start gravitating more to that.
I agree.
The last question for you is, do you have a dream media in mind that you would like to see or create before you pass on to this physical plane?
Before I'm reincarnated into my next life. There's so much. A big thing of mine is, I'm a huge fan of August Wilson. Say what you want. But I just love the idea of having a series of plays that he wrote at all different times, and wrote them all at different, he didn't write them all sequentially, so he just kind of wrote when he wrote, telling stories of Black lives. And it's a dream of mine to have like a collection of plays that do that, but with Black, queer and trans lives, I just think that would be really cool. And there's a few documentaries that I want to do about, not necessarily ballroom culture, but expression and dance, and how that's like a language of freedom for specifically queer people. Because if you ever paid attention going out to parties or things like that, whenever music comes on that we all vibe to or like gravitate towards, it becomes this liberating experience. And just for that moment, in that moment of dancing, everything else melts away and we have no problems in the world. And I just find that that's something that's not talked about.
Even I was watching Grapevine last night, and they were talking about queerness existing in Blackness. And I think when people think about queerness, because like media has like
that's why I watched it.
And
polarized it too. They're
exactly,
like, this is queer.
And it's like in relation to sexuality,
right,
and it has nothing to do with sexuality sometimes.
Right.
So it's just like I love that, because not everyone's gonna understand Blackness or Black identity or the way we move, the way we feel rhythm, or the way we do our hair or dress. And I think that that's something so beautiful in regards to queerness.
And it all tells a story of who you are. That's why we express that way. It's because we want something to be told of us, and we want people to know that I'm here and I matter and my voice matters.
Wow, thank you. At the end of all my interviews, I always ask, is there any advice or wisdom you wish to share?
Continue to love yourselves, love our earth, and love each other, even when it's hard. Push through it. And I think that's where breakthroughs happen, is when you push through being uncomfortable, you push through being bitter, you push through being mad, you push through any excuse you give yourself not to love someone. And I don't mean like in a romantic, like, oh my gosh, I'm in love with you, but like in a deep, conditional, platonic, human way, right? Like, I love you and I care about you, which is why I'm here to support you, which is why when you step out of bounds, I want you to know, like, hey, this was wrong. You said this, you really should be saying this, or, what you said wasn't cool. Let's talk about it. And continue to call people in. One of my good friends coined that for me, at least. I don't know who really coined it, but instead of calling people out, calling people in, and getting behind some of these isms that are within all of us, right? So yeah, radical love.
Beautiful. Is there anything you wish to promote or ways we can reach you?
I recently did a publication called Revelations. It's all about being queer and Black, and specifically male. There'll definitely be more to come. But check that out. It's on my website, jcreative with an X, jxreative.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you again for sharing this and being you and existing. And yeah. Once again, this has been Brax to Let You Know, where we are using the voices in this world for the change we need in the world. And we will see you next time.